What to watch now?
Where we talk about what's streaming on Netflix right now. And today, I specifically saved this movie for, what else? 420! Today, we are talking about Pineapple Express and why it is the most perfect 420 movie that could possibly exist. Like, if this is the equivalence of the Jim Carrey version of The Grinch to Christmas. And I'm gonna go into that and why that is. To create the ambiance of today, I'm just going to spontaneously light a lighter every now and then because the compulsive person in me just finds it really fun, and the other part of me knows it's probably triggering something in your brain associated with this day. So isn't that not just perfect? Don't worry, I won't do that too much so it won't hurt your ears. But before anything, if you wouldn't mind just taking a quick moment and subscribing to this podcast, giving it a like, become a friend, come hang out. But most importantly, if you could help me, you could do me like a solid and tell one friend, tweet about this podcast, something. It would mean the world to me. I love this podcast. I want to make it my full-time job. And that kind of shit really helps out. So one last thing before we go into this podcast, I just want to say, please become a Patreon supporter today. I'm going to put out that big dick energy right now with my magic lighter, and I'm going to manifest that Seth Rogan's going to listen to this review, and he's going to love it so much that he is going to become my top Patreon tier, and I'm going to give him exclusively like a postcard every month where I write him haikus, and he secretly is like my biggest stan. So I'm lighting my manifest lighter, and I'm going to blow it out. Wish came true. Okay, so this is a 2008 movie. It was directed by David Gordon. Green, I think it is. Really kooky, weird IMDb of movies. Unless you're like pretty familiar and you're like regularly keeping up to date to the stuff that isn't maybe as high profiled in movie theaters, but is still pretty notable in the indie world. He has done pretty much every movie you can think about. He's a weird, quirky guy. I would say this is the most like commercial thing he's made, but in a good way. That's why there's this uncharacteristic smooth flow to the whole thing, even though a lot of chaos is going on. The writers are iconically Seth Rogan, Judd Apatow, and Evan Goldberg, another guy who works with Seth Rogan often. A lot of the most, again, iconic movies you can think of that are more up there commercially, like Goon and different things like that. I think he's working on the latest Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen movie as well. He's done Superbad. He's done a bunch of things you are familiar with. He's one of those guys where, like, you think his name would be as big as Seth Rogen's, considering all the stuff he's been involved with, either as a producer or writer and stuff like that. And I guess, I mean, he could be totally happy being behind the scenes. That's how I am as a person. But anyways, Seth Rogen. What's so interesting about this time period with Pineapple Express is he said when he was like, maybe it was 24 or something, maybe 22 or 21, he had come off of Freaks and Geeks, which only got that one iconic season, which I'm just thinking about now. I should totally do a podcast on. Yeah. Well, anyways, he had come off that, and he just kind of had this creative spurt in him where he came up and composed a bunch of screenplays like Knocked Up, Superbad, Pineapple Express, a bunch of them. And he successfully got them all approved. So Seth Rogen just like had a couple years in a row where he came out with all these iconic movies, these instant classics that are still pretty regarded to this day. And he just seemed like this prolific writer, but in reality, he had a couple years to think this stuff up. It worked out all in his favor. It doesn't make it any less valid. I'm just making a point of like how you set up a career. And he's made tons of great stuff after that, but if you notice, it majorly slowed down because that was his little almost portfolio to the world of being like, hey, check me out. I've got some cool stuff to offer. this is my humor. Let me establish a genre, so to speak. So Pineapple Express was a part of it. Fun fact about 420. This movie, by the way, is not on 420, but it's essentially the creme de la creme of weed culture. But 420, fun fact about 420, actually has nothing to do with weed, which is why it's so weird that it's synonymously associated with it. The inventor of LSD, iconically this day, so to speak, he invented LSD and he decided to take it to basically see if his experiment worked. And he went on a bike ride. And so he had this crazy tripping experience while he was on a bike ride on a beautiful day. This is how 420 began. And that's why it's also sometimes referred to as Bicycle Day for that reason. And somewhere along the line, it became more associated with marijuana, which I don't know how. One day, maybe next year, we'll celebrate this holiday together next year, and I'll look up the reason why in a less lazy format. But just thought I'd throw that out there, which I think is kind of interesting. So, this movie, why is it the best 420 movie ever? Okay, well, one, it could focus on anything. I would say there's a lot of movies out there that go along with the idea of associating themselves with drugs in general, or specifically marijuana. But every one of them has a different flavor or specific subject they want to approach. This movie hits all of those subjects and embodies the feeling of being high and that type of train of thinking perfectly through a storyline. So one, it involves weed culture, the acts of buying, a lot of the myths that go along with it, that for whatever reason, no matter how long people have been smoking weed, they just keep telling each other, like, oh, did you know if you cough, that means you're getting really high, stuff like, myths like that. It's got that genius idiocy, because people always make fun of the stupid things people come up with when they're high, but let's be real, most of our culture is built on people that were doing drugs, they had a good idea, and then everyone else agreed that it was a good idea, because a lot of people say, I'm not promoting drugs, by the way, in any way, shape, or form, just putting that out there, but a lot of people think that when you are like, high on weed or something like that, you just kind of, your kind of worries go away, so maybe you're able to think more clearly and allow your mind to go in a bit of a surreal viewpoint, and that helps you kind of connect to those ideas. So I like to call it genius idiocy for those exact reasons, or just like creative solutions they come up with the movie. They're so fucking funny. Then it's got its origins in the government, that like how it began and what it's associated with in that illegal standpoint. And then last but not least, like I said before, I would say the biggest thing that is the selling point of Pineapple Express, and why I would kind of say, whether you're into that type of stuff like smoking or not, or you just think you're just interested in what it's like, just you want to just like take a peek in it or have a good time in a movie. Being high is kind of like somehow always going on a magical adventure. I can't tell you how many people I know where like they went and smoked and they just kind of, like they're in college or something, and they go and follow a friend to dinner they don't normally, and before they know it, they're at someone's house. And then like the I don't know if this is too much of a callback, but if you're familiar with Tim and Eric Awesome Show, one of the members that was like a special guest, he would come on, he would do this puppet act, and he was definitely his own unusual flavor. He said some crazy ass shit, and they would put psychedelics behind him and stuff like that. For some freak weird reason, he showed up in my college town, and he ended up doing a show at a house show in one of the areas, and because everyone recognized him, he went on an entire long 2-hour speech about how he believes in aliens and like his whole philosophies. Like that's what he wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about aliens. And that was like an event where a friend of mine missed her bus. She went on the wrong bus, decided to follow a friend. This is all while she was high, and she just found herself at this exact moment. That's kind of what I think weed embodies, is this magical misadventure kind of mixed with weirdly like paranoia and overjoyed happiness. It's, when I say it, it seems so much more complex, but it's really not. Okay, so let's get into Pineapple Express and the beauty of all of it. It starts off with a black and white, again, embodying that feel of when they would tell you about reefer madness and all this craziness. And it's black and white, it's almost informational in a way. And we're seeing an underground government facility under a secretive rock in the middle of nowhere. And they have, in a closed-off glass room, Bill Hader playing a soldier testing the marijuana. He's so funny. He's mimicking jazz. Again, jazz was really big in the marijuana moment, so it's like a nice little hint or talking about that association. I loved the moment when they comedically came in and they were wearing this crazy scuba dive outfit and they went to light his joint, and he's laughing because it is absolutely ridiculous. They're afraid of it being poisonous or inebriating you in a permanent way or anything negative, but it's also the wildness of, like, a lot of people when they're on weed, while people might look at them and see them as goofy or weird or out of touch, often people say that when they are smoking, they feel like they see the truth and they realize how weird, like, commercials are. It's like you suddenly open your eyes to how bizarre life is and how it's bizarre no one's talking about it. So that to me was like a perfect little embodiment of all those ideas. And in the moment, they're smoking and he's expressing what it's like and they're deciding they can't use it, so they want to shut down the program. Now, this is really interesting because I'm not very familiar with how weed is associated through the government. Like, did weed get initially brought in through the government for testing, or was it just brought in by someone else that figured, hey, people will probably smoke this? Like, I'm not quite sure what the background is in that, with specifically America, but again, going back to LSD, they did initially invent LSD through the government, and it was believed to create potentially either super soldiers or a truth serum, which is so fucking funny because if you know anything about LSD, it's a very inconsistent results, and it doesn't really have anything to do with that. Like, I would argue people could totally still lie to you, either being high or on marijuana or LSD, but people tend to be more honest and want to be closer to who they authentically are, so they just don't feel like it's not like alcohol where your inebriations get turned off because a part of your brain is being stimulated. It's more like they want to be their own themselves, and some people aren't, so they have more of a choice in the matter. So the whole idea just makes me laugh. So we start off with the government and that happening, and then we cut to being introduced to Seth Rogan, aka Dale Denton. Love that boring ass white person name. So fucking funny to me. Dale is kind of like, how do I express this? So we go to movies and you want this mix of being lost in the moment with the movies that you're you're watching, but you also want to kind of feel like there's this fantasy being sold to you. Sometimes too much honesty is a little too brutal, especially you see a man that's working an everyday job and maybe not living up to his quote unquote societal fullest potential. At least he feels that way. And in real life, people can't wait for their shift to be over. They're sad. They feel like they're becoming more and more detached to their peers. Maybe they see other people's storylines on Instagram being more comparable to them. It tends to be when people sometimes don't make the most of their lives. It actually makes me think a lot about in France. I'm often told this, I've heard this many times, a lot of people in certain parts of the world, I'm specifically talking about France, tend to view their job as their job. So no one's like looking down on each other. It's more of a like, yeah, I'm a taxi driver, but like, why wouldn't I want to go out with my friends after? A lot of people tend to think, oh, my job is less than, or I will be judged for it, and then therefore isolate themselves, which is so unfortunate because, like, if we no longer had that be a comparable form of success, I think we'd all be more in each other's lives and a lot happier, more social. Maybe the people who wouldn't be funny because they'd be so sad would finally be able to connect to that part of themselves. It would only be all peace, love, and harmony. You get what I'm saying? And he is living that fantasy in the movie where he is simultaneously, like he's selling you he's the everyday man, but I would say he's having a lot of fun and he's making the most of it. He's the type of person who would serve you for a divorce or a lawsuit or whatever. And when you get served, you have to say your name first and acknowledge that who you are. So some people who are preparing to be served will do whatever they can to not turn to you, be avoiding. So you have to trick them, make them think that you're delivering a package, pizza delivering. I'm just curious, does anyone who listens to this podcast, have you ever had that as a job? Is that actually a thing where you wear costumes, or is it just purely you hunt them down and you serve them it? I don't know. Either way, in American Gangsters, actually another podcast we did, which you should totally listen to that. That's some like offshore work some cops did in that one, which I thought was interesting because it's gone from a more official standpoint to an everyday man who's probably only making like maybe $9 an hour or something. Anyways, so Dale Denton drives around, and while he's serving papers and wearing fun little costumes and stuff like that, and somehow successfully pushing off any negative viewpoints people are putting on him, he has the opportunity to get away with and enjoy smoking all day. He loves to regularly call in and have engaging conversations with people on radio shows, which I think is just so funny and also fun simultaneously. And he has the freedom to pick his own schedule in a way, so he will often go and visit his his high school girlfriend. Oh, by the way, if you don't notice, she's much younger. Her face is a little bit rounder. But do you recognize Amber Heard, Johnny Depp's ex-wife, aka what is it? I don't know what her name is in Aquaman, but Queen Aquaman, we'll call her. Did you recognize her? One thing that I find so fascinating is a lot of movies that we all thought were funny or were more well-known or iconic have definitely aged in the last 20 years as we become more and more, what's the word, aware, aware, more woke. Like sometimes people who would never, how do I put this? People have learned to stop being racist, transphobic, homophobic, sexist, more and more and more, especially when people strive to want to be that way and we're like, I didn't know this equaled that. I'll try to stop doing that. So you look back at some movies and you're like, ooh, that's in bad taste, or ooh, that's just not okay now, because people don't want to be like that anymore. And this movie is one of those really rare cases where it's still not only aged well and is genuinely funny, but one of those topics that I think a lot of us recoil at is the conversation of an underage relationship. Even if she's 18, I think most of us can agree that dating anyone from high school is super fucking inappropriate. They are for sure just a kid. By the way, if anybody's younger listening to this, I don't think your opinion is less than or anything like that. I'm not ageist from older age to younger age. I personally think a lot of, very young kids can make some smart, intelligent decisions, and we all have to start somewhere and have a mistake in some way. And that being the case, it's not a lack of dating you because you're somehow immature or dumb or anything like that. It's that your frontal lobe is not fully developed. And honestly, when you get to be the age and feel such an intense age difference, even from 20 to 18, and I think his character's supposed to be probably 22, 24, to an 18-year-old, that's true. When you're older, if you're 25 and you're dating a 32-year-old, it doesn't fucking matter anymore. But when you're 18, the level of maturity and your development for the world and your innocence grows dramatically in those 8 years. I would say between 13 to probably 22. That's why it's even gross when you hear about a 16-year-old dating a 14-year-old. Do you hear that number? That's like a child. That's like a mini adult and a child. It's gross. So that's why a lot of people would, in any other circumstance, consider this part of the movie really gross and creepy and weird. But the only reason why it works is it's a beautiful metaphor. Seth Rogen pulls it off because he just doesn't feel creepy as a person, and that's important. So it keeps that creep factor at bay just by him as a human being. He doesn't seem like someone who would naturally really want to do that ever, so that's nice. But Amber Heard's character, or Angie Anderson, the funny fucking alliteration. Yeah, all alliteration. Soul Silver, Angie Anderson, Dale Denton. Man, they were definitely high when they wrote those. Anyways, so Angie, he's like a representation of his both lack of maturity for dating someone so young and not feeling comfortable enough with himself to date someone that's cool and beautiful, whatever his own age. But I think there's just the humor in the fact that she is quite mature. She does handle things well, and she wants to move on forward in the relationship. She understands who he is, and she accepts that, but he can't accept himself. So it's kind of, it works for so many different weird reasons. It does help that she's 18, but somehow they made this weird circumstance work out really well. It's a great little funny relationship. And also, I want to know your opinion. I have a Twitter in the link below, and also, like, you can write me an email, whatever, however you want to communicate with me. But I want to know your opinion on this. When Angie is having those conversations with the high school boys, it makes Dale very insecure. But this is how much they thought it out. Because again, they're not trying to be sexist or anything in this movie. I think they're amazing when it comes to this, how timeless this feels. But, so, when she is flirting with him, or I'm so sorry, there is no flirting. When this Angie girl, and the high school guy are talking, the pitch and tone and the way they speak to each other is so borderline. Because if she was being flirtatious, I would call her out and be like, come on, Angie, like, how would you be okay with that if he did that with another girl? That's pretty insensitive, especially right in front of him. But she's not in her tone, not in the reciprocation. She's very open. She introduces, like, unabashedly, like, this is my boyfriend. She lets it know the boundaries being heard. But on the other hand, like, that high school guy for sure wants to hit it with Angie. And he understandably should feel insecure because, this guy's a confident, young, super in his shape dude. And he feels like he's too old and out of touch, and he, by some pure luck, is dating her. So it's really funny in that moment because they have it in that perfect little line of scope where you can understand both of their point of views. And it's so, like, borderline of, like, should she do something differently? Is it okay what she's doing? I'm sure she's somewhat aware that guy's flirting with her. Not that that's her fault or she should be penalized for it, but a lot of fun factors going on. Anyways, so as we're getting introduced to Dale's character and his background story, we also then get introduced to his drug dealer, Soul Silver, played by James Franco, aka just James Franco with highlights. This movie is so great for their relationship, and I think it brings up an important conversation. So a lot of, not about drug dealers specifically, but Soul and Dale, when they get together, Dale finds it a bit of a burden. He feels like Soul wants to be more his friend than the other way around. And he hates that he feels like there's a sense of lingering. He's forced to hang out with him. He thinks he's his friend, so on and so forth. And kind of thinks he's in some way, shape, or form better than him, which makes me laugh. But at the same time, they clearly click in the beginning. I don't think Soul's having to pull Dens like that hard to hang out with him. He clearly feels very comfortable speaking about very personal matters. Like, when all's said and done, if there's a list of what makes a friend and you're doing it with this guy, I think you're his friend. Kind of like when people use that same analogy for when you're trying to figure out if the person you're with you feel romantically interested in, which is really funny. So I just love that whole idea of their cute their conversations, and this is when we get a lot of the myth conversations of when, like, Dale's coughing and Soul is like, that makes you higher, or like it shows I don't know what they're called, but it's when there's another joint and another joint and there's three ends and you light them. And he's talking about this way it's crafted, like, oh, it's the next level. The way when people talk about marijuana names, they act as if they just know the caliber of what it represents, and kind of overhyping something that's just basically a flower, that they're getting there's like a cool factor around the whole thing that they're trying to show off. So that whole thing was funny, but I actually just want to take a moment and say that this is an important learning lesson for anybody who is in this circumstance. I gotta tell you, people that you think you're better than them, but you're still hanging out with them, I think you should get over yourself and realize that whatever prerequisites you have, you need to get over. How do I express this? Okay. You can be friends with someone and say to yourself, well, realistically, they just don't stimulate me in X, Y, and Z way. It's not a reputation thing. I just don't realistically. You move all the sensibilities of culture and societal pressures. I just don't. I don't know why I said culture pressures, just societal pressures. Um, you don't want to hang out with them, but in the end, whenever you run into them, it's not bad, it's fine, you can chat, you can hang out. Then it can just be that. Like, you can be friends with them in that way and stop acting like you should be ashamed of them or X, Y, and Z. It's so funny. I actually knew a girl in high school. I would consider her my version of a soul. We, by pure coincidence, knew each other all throughout high school, coincidentally had a lot of classes with each other. We never disliked each other, there was nothing negative, but she did get treated differently. There was this viewpoint that she was quote unquote weird, and somehow that was negative, and she seemed kind of off and kind of loony, from overly smiley to super zoned out. And not because she was like on drugs or anything, but she just seemed like there was just something that instead of people accepting like that's just who she is, it was this vibe of like we have to stay away from her. And her and I were friends for that reason alone, and I did like her, but I never felt a reason or desire to want to hang out with her, purely because like I was fine talking with her. She was fine, but like I said before, she just it was nothing to do with any worries. I actually did hang out with her a couple times and had no problem admitting that freely. There was no embarrassment to be had by being friends with her. But it was just that like I don't hang out with a lot of people. I'm a intense introvert and hermit. I find people tend to take energy from me. And I felt that I wasn't as stimulated in the conversation. And I don't click with a lot of people on that deep, deep level. I get along with a lot of people, and that's real, but I need to be stimulated, and she didn't do that for me. But that's fine. Like I said, no negative thing. But anyways, um, when time went by and I realized, wow, in a weird way, we're kind of like friends, I'm going to just fully embrace this like next level, just like totally be that much more open with her, because at this point we've known each other so many years, and like, again, when you go down the list, we're clearly friends. So I started becoming friends with her. I ended up finding out that she was extremely heavily medicated on ADD. Her mom was kind of fucking nuts, and she was so intensely medicated that she would go from like her natural personality, which was like very hyped up energy, one day to just like it was so sad. Like, she would be so zonked out on her medication. She was just like, she was suffering. They were killing her brain. It was like way too much medicine. It was like an illegal amount of medicine she was on. And then at the same time, she had a pretty kind of like shitty family that just kind of kept having children, but no one was taking care of them. So since she was like 10, she had two younger siblings who were incredibly, like, a lot younger than us, and she was taking care of them out of the crib. They more considered her like a mother and than their own parents, and no one had any idea she was doing all this kind, loving acts, and she would drive them to their ballerina practices into her adulthood. Like, just a very kind, loving soul, but that's a lot of responsibility on a kid. Her family would also, I don't know if they were just suffering financially or it was a weird money thing psychologically, but I live in a pretty cold part of the United States. They wouldn't have heat in their house in the winter, and she would often be in a jacket if I came by to drop off homework or something like that. And she never complained about it or told anyone or was embarrassed about it in the least. And she told me privately that her real dad, because her mom had remarried, that's who she lived with, her real dad was actually, I can't remember if he was bipolar, schizophrenic, or something, but he was not a nice person. Not that, by the way, not that that mental illness makes you a bad person, not in the least, but he was not a good person, and he had a child with another woman, and my friend was deeply concerned for the child and said that she felt concerned because when she tried to have a relationship with her dad, he would get kind of like psychotically paranoid, violent towards her, and she protected herself. But the point, what I'm trying to say is, she had shit going on in her life, and through it all, she decided to put on a smiley face, and she was a generally at heart optimistic person. What I'm trying to say is, people are fucking going through shit, so pull back your judgments, Be open-minded, even if they don't know how to exactly perform social norms. Get over it. Just kind of be like, that's who they are. It's somehow we always seem to have a friend who's like, that person's a dick, that person's an asshole. That's fine, Kes just an asshole. And we're quicker to accept that than someone just being a little dash off. You know what I mean? So, and for good reason, she was off from trauma and medication. So was she really off? Just want to point that out. So that was my really long rant of laughing at the beginning of Seth thinking he's better than someone, when in reality, I'm not accusing anyone of having a lower, higher paying job, but they're pretty much in the same avenue of the fringes of quote unquote, you know, occupational society or whatever you want to call it. Lots of society terms. Ooh, if I say society a bunch of times, I sound so smart. Just kidding. So, what happens is, after they go and hang out, they smoke a little, we get all these introductions, everything heads off when Seth Rogen's character, Dale Denton, goes to serve one last guy for the night. He wasn't planning to return back to Seoul, but it will go into why he did. When he goes off and he goes to serve, he's taking a moment, he's talking to someone, I think his girlfriend potentially, about meeting her parents, finally taking that step forward. And he's smoking, and he, by pure, coincidence, is at the wrong place at the wrong time. He basically witnesses a lady cop who he initially thinks he's going to be pulled over by her. So that's why he hides. But he sees a lady cop, a.k.a. Carol, a.k.a. played by, hold on, I wrote her fucking name down. Rosie Perez. And Garry Cole plays Ted Jones? Sorry, I wrote, my handwriting's not very good right now, so, I mean, not that it's ever really good, so I have trouble reading my handwriting sometimes. So anyways, so Ted and Carol shoot this man, and he panics, and he runs into her car, runs into another car, and he escapes, and he, out of panicness, throws his joint that had this Pineapple Express, exclusively given by his so-called, not called friend Soul, the drug dealer. This is an exclusive type of weed, so on and so forth. And that is how Ted is able to smoke this joint that's on the ground, know what it is, know that this isn't sold to many drug dealers, and he's easily able to pinpoint that Soul would have given it and that Dale Denton's involved. He basically worked his way down the chain super fucking fast, which is just so funny because what ends up happening throughout this movie is Dale and Soul are basically in a panic and on the run the rest of the movie, trying to figure out what to do now that they've witnessed these things and people are after them. Simultaneously, Carol and Ted think that this huge, because they're like in the bigger, there would have been like the head guys selling weed to everyone else. They think they're against some like masterminds, a rival gang, and so we have all these goofy incidences working out in the favor of Soul and Dale, while the other people think that they're geniuses. And I don't know why. I guess for the reasons, like I said before, genius idiocy, everything seeming to magically work out and kind of go on an adventure for people who are like smoking weed. It kind of all comes together in that beautiful encompassment that represents 420. Along this way, we also meet Red, played by Danny McBride. So fucking funny. If you think for a second Soul Silver is a little off or goofy or unique or weird, Red, the person who is the drug dealer above him but between him and Ted, is on a whole nother level and flavor. He's like crazy afro perm and kimono wearing Ugg boots, making a cake for his cat's birthday that died 3 months before. He's so weird. He's so goofy. He'll sell you out in a second. He's overconfident. He's a weenie. He's just the most vital use of information and completely useless, which again, I just feel like that is how a lot of people would express their experience on marijuana. So it's almost like he's an embodiment of a lot of those ideas. Dale and Soul are like two halves of that whole, but Red is the entire, thesis of the point. And unfortunately, Red, unfortunately, Red sells them out pretty quickly to two hilarious drug dealers fighting about who they used to be, since one of them is now dating someone, and just kind of having that casual conversations. I don't know if I went into it enough. I think I did a little bit on my review of the Venture Brothers, which you should totally check out. Actually, cool news, the person who voiced Hank Venture and fucking Brock Samson both liked my tweet. So yay! I've been acknowledged by Hank, or not Hank, I'm so sorry, Dean and Brock. So cool. So in the Venture Brothers, one of the things that makes it stand out in humor is its ability to have these like wacky, crazy, over-the-top situations happen, and then everything come to a halt to have a goofy, way too casual conversation. But a lot of people, sorry Tim and Eric, I gotta put you under this fire. A lot of people who try to make that joke kind of happen in that type of flavor capacity, it's just really not fucking funny. You get it, you get the point they're trying to do, but the bit's just going on a little too long. Or actually, I don't think I want to throw Tim and Eric under the bus. I would say a lot of SNL skits in that way. So that being the case, this is like the Venture Brothers in those moments where it is genuinely funny, it makes sense, you're wrapped up in the extremes of someone being shot in the fucking stomach with wacky duct tape on their head, mixed with them like talking about who you used to be and do you want to wear my vest and everything. Anyways, so they go through this whole chain of events, and eventually they can't keep running anymore because, unfortunately, our boy Soul Silver gets caught by the main guys. And this is where it all comes around. They didn't have to do this, but there's something special in my heart that they made this creative choice. But the very beginning of the movie that began with the underground place where they were testing the weed, they shut it down, they didn't like the freedom of ideas and so on and so forth, and the energy levels of and being talked back and against authority and stuff like that, is the now very headquarters for Ted Jones's giant major marijuana experiment, and is now being used in an illegal way, which I think is super fun. Our boy, Dale Denton, finally realizes he's a piece of shit. He should stop judging him. He was, Soul was there for him, so he could run away in this moment. But he not only chooses to go back for him, but is able to eventually convince Red, who does ditch him for a moment, but does come back, the poor guy. I have no idea how he lives so long in the movie, because he goes hours with many bullets shot in his stomach. That's like one of those little over-the-top, not realistic concepts that is super fun that they went with. They have a whole shootout, things work in their favor, don't work in their favor. They end up, it's beautiful, over dramatic fighting, especially at Red's house. Red's house, where Soul and Dale kick his ass, is the most over the top comedic fights I can think of off the top of my head, where you can't stop laughing. Like when Red is trying to punch Soul in the balls, but it's very slow and not dramatic, but I'm sure getting stomped in the balls even a little bit hurts a lot, I'm assuming. Or when he's punching Dale's butt, there's just a lot of goofy fucking things going on, or the dramatic strength of Soul throwing Red into his boudoir. I love it. So they have this whole shootout, and they basically end the movie with all three boys somehow surviving this mayhem. I guess they're not worried about anything getting caught up with the police or anything. They're just amazing they're alive, and they decide to all become very good friends, even saying, let's get one of those friendship, necklaces where it says best friends, but it's split apart 3 ways. By the way, that one makes me laugh so fucking hard, because it's not that that's a bad idea, and I'm sure if you Googled it, a 3-way necklace totally exists. But the whole part that's funny is when you break apart a heart, if you were to break it apart 3 ways, like when you break it apart 2 ways, you have the 2 halves of the heart, so you understand there's a shape of the heart. It looks very cute and poetic. But whoever has that middle squiggly ass ramen piece, it's just going to be so common. Like, even though they might say they're all friends of an equivalent level, whoever has that middle, ragatoni bit in the middle is literally just going to be like, you're the least loved friend, clearly. You don't know it, but you're on the outer levels playing third wheel, if you get that. Couldn't you see them all getting their necklace and Red's character complaining about getting the squiggly level, trying to say, well, if it doesn't matter, Soul, then trade with me. And Soul being like, I don't want that. I want the good heart piece with Dale. And them fighting over wanting to have a better heart piece to match with Dale. That's exactly what's going on in my head. So basically the movie somehow blows up, gets super ridiculous, tons of references along the way, lots of Pineapple Express, and they somehow survive it all. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think he's no longer with Angie, if I remember. Like, at first they have a heart-to-heart, and there's a sense of growing up, and then I think it all goes to shit again or something. It doesn't matter. It's a great movie. It's really fun. You should totally check it out. No matter what you're celebrating today, it's on Netflix. It's super fucking fun. It's somehow timeless. And I think that we need more goofiness in our life. So if you agree, please become a Patreon supporter today so we can keep having a goofy spirit together and make a bunch of goofy projects together. And don't forget to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell me what you're watching today or how you like to celebrate in general any positive holiday. And I love you the most platonic way possible. Bye!